So what should we expect from Wells Fargo, especially after the headlines from about a month ago that put them back on par with the other big banks?
Yeah, a lot of optimism. It's been a tough road for Wells Fargo, really since 2018 with that asset cap, significant underperformance. If you look at them compared to especially names like JP Morgan, they've really underperformed for a while. But with the asset cap lifted, we think they are positioned to play offense. They're really likely going to start talking more about investment banking and credit card. Those are areas which we really think they're going to expand in. Obviously, in April, there were concerns about tariffs. But we actually expect credit quality to be pretty positive. Everything we've heard so far about spending has been actually pretty good. A little bit light on travel, but generally speaking, spending has been good. So we're not actually too worried about credit quality at this point and really think they're well positioned for growth.
Positioned for growth, but the headline that they had been restored to normal, is how I would phrase it, is barely a month and a half old. So we're not really going to see anything reflected in the previous quarter, or will we?
No, you're correct. Yeah, actual growth in the second quarter will probably be quite weak. Although I was a little bit positive there on tariffs, that is still going to have a negative impact on loans, especially on the commercial side. Businesses just really didn't want to make investments this quarter in terms of building inventory or just future planning. They just didn't really know how that was going to play out. So loan growth will probably be pretty anemic. And honestly, probably for the second half of 2025 might pick up a bit, but that's probably going to be more of a 2026 story. And then same with deposits, probably pretty light growth, but it's more about 2026 and beyond where it's going to be more positive.
So, what do you want to hear from the C suite during the earnings call, looking ahead at the second half of this year, but also looking ahead at 2026? I mean, how do they reclaim perhaps their rightful position in, being one of the top banks in the country?
Yeah, we want to see success in those new areas I was talking about. So, investment banking, for example, that is an area they didn't specialize in. So, if you look at Wells Fargo, even though they've struggled with that asset cap, they're still third, fourth, depending on the quarter, largest bank in the US from asset perspective. But if you look at investment banking, they're more like seventh. So there's a lot of runway there. So we're looking for market share gains. Last time I looked, they were about 3% market share, but they were only about 2% in 2021. So they have been growing there, but we want continued success there. And then on credit card, they're right now mostly going after customers at Wells Fargo because they're significantly underpenetrated. So again, with credit cards, they're about half the rate of the typical bank their size. Obviously, JP Morgan, Citi, much larger credit card portfolios. So we want growth in credit card, but we don't want that to come at the price of credit quality, right? One issue is sometimes when banks try to expand quickly, they end up getting into credit concerns. So we want to watch that credit card book as well.
I'm going to use my words. They are not your words. But has Wells Fargo, and this question comes from the standpoint of an individual investor, not an institutional investor, has Wells Fargo sufficiently addressed the issues, cheating their customers, breaking the law, lying to their clients? Has that all in the past? Will someone like me, an individual investor, be willing to take a chance on this bank?
I think it's in the past. However, these large banks, they do often get in trouble. But new CEO, Charlie Schaaf, I mean, not that new, but he came in after the asset cap came in place. And he has really changed the culture at the bank. I think they've gotten rid of about 13 or 14 consent orders during his time. So really transformed from a bank that consistently had issues to today pretty much gone from all of those consent orders. Just that one left related to the asset cap, but mostly it's gone. The asset cap part is gone, but they still need to invest in compliance. They've made significant strides. If you look at areas like wealth management, they had really been losing not only customers but also talent on their end, just because they didn't want to work for Wells Fargo. They thought it wasn't going to be a place they could succeed. That has turned around. They're actually now seeing growth there. Their clients are starting to trust them more. I think it is a story of improved credibility given this new management team. This management team is not afraid to say when they make a mistake. They're not afraid to mention that they need significant improvement. Sometimes, with executive teams, it's always positive, and that can, you don't necessarily can trust them. This management team is not that. This management team has been more honest.
And then when you look at Wells Fargo, at what point can an individual investor, or perhaps even the institutional investors, I mean, the big money, Would it ever make sense to compare them to your options with the other large banks like a JP Morgan or a Citi? Or do they get their own kind, I'll call it free ride for the next year to two as they catch up?
I would say you can compare them to those banks. I mean, J.P. Morgan is sort of the the top of the pack, and then Citi, Bank of America. I mean, those are the top four banks. Yeah, I think you compare them in terms. From now on, you can now compare them in terms of loan and deposits. I mean, they have lost a lot of ground, as I had mentioned. It's not just on the asset side, on deposit side. If you think about COVID, that was a big opportunity for these banks, right? We saw 30-40% growth in deposits, and Wells Fargo couldn't do that because they were constrained. So in the next few years, it will be interesting to see, can they play offense? They've done a good job of playing defense, getting rid of those consent orders, improving their compliance, but now will be, can they play offense? And if they cannot, then yeah, you're going to want to stick with those bigger names like JP Morgan. But we are confident that they can, especially because it's just lower hanging fruit, right? JP Morgan is already top of the mountain. They have, when they're growing, they have to take it from others. Wells Fargo can actually build it in themselves, right? So again, they're under penetrated, and when you're under penetrated, it just is a little bit cheaper to expand.
I think of Wells Fargo as a West Coast bank, but they're a national bank. But where's their biggest footprint?
Yeah. At this point, they're definitely they're all around the U.S. I wouldn't say really any specific state. I mean, I guess California is the most significant, but no individual state drives their performance. Very national at this point. So if you're worried about any regional downturns, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a Wells Fargo issue versus some of the other regional banks, which are much more concentrated.
And this question will date me and probably would have been more appropriate in 2010, not 2025. But, branch build out, is that even an issue that a bank like Wells Fargo will be looking at? Or is it more about branch consolidation as everything is now digital anyway?
So they are still very concentrated on working on their branches. I wouldn't necessarily say expanding. It's more enhancing, improving the digital. They have been reducing staff. So if you look at since 2020, the amount of employees has actually dropped every single quarter. So they're really actually working on those efficiency improvements. But branches are still important. If you look at upsells, if you look at people who get credit cards, people in wealth management, really the kind of more expensive products, people still want the branch. So although digital is a positive, you have to realize digital, it becomes more commoditized. So when you go digital, if you look at banks that are more digital, deposit costs start to rise. So most only like digital only banks, they're paying just a little bit less than the federal funds rate, whereas Wells Fargo can charge much lower because of that branch footprint. So yes, they are going to work more on digital, but the actual footprint is still very important. Although I wouldn't actually expect it to grow, more optimize and enhance.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, the only other thing I guess that we didn't mention is just the most recent stress test that came out in late June. Just want to point out that they had really good results there. So 2 years ago, they were in pretty good shape in terms of how much capital they were required to hold. But then last year, they were required by regulators to increase that amount pretty significantly. And they were pretty disappointed because they didn't actually really understand why that was the case. They had thought they had de-risked the bank, and regulators sort of had disagreed. And this year, regulators agreed again, which was a positive, and now they're actually back to the minimum level. So the minimum amount of capital that they could be required to hold, they hold now. What does that do? That means now they have a lot of excess capital, so they can lean into loan growth if that actually materializes, which we're a little bit skeptical on, but hopefully that will materialize. And if it doesn't materialize, they can return that in terms of share repurchases. They already increased their dividend by 12.5% following that, but through those repurchases, it'll be a more likelihood that they will have a higher return on equity, that type of thing.